Right, I've got a memory card now for this phone and I'm just testing it out. I'm actually making a circuit at the moment. I've never done this on before because normally when I'm using a camera I've got so much junk around, as you can see. It's difficult actually to have a camera connected to the computer and filming it all and doing the electronics at the same time. This circuit I'm making, it's a charge buffer that I'm currently developing. On the oscilloscope, what happens is when the voltage drops, when the voltage coming from the solar panels is quite low, say between about 5 volts and about 14 volts, and it's not sufficient enough to give a full charge to the battery. What happens is you get what's called a residual. There you go, it's going up, look now. What you get is a residual charge which can take many hours, and I'll just show you that. Hang on. See, because it's cloudy outside, there's no sun, and the voltage on the charge buffer at the moment is only 7.15 volts. Well, that's not enough to charge my 11.1 volt or 12 volt battery. So this power is being dumped into the supercapacitors, and what I'm making is a circuit that automatically dumps that power through a boost regulator, which is, hang on, sorry about the darkness. This is a boost regulator that steps up any voltage between about 4 volts to basically 20 volts. So the energy that's stored in the supercapacitors, once it gets to around, at the moment it's actually about, once it gets to around 15 or 14 volts, the circuit kicks in, activates a relay. Well, this is an old board, by the way. This circuit board here is very ancient. I've had this since the 1980s or somewhere around about. But this is just for the time being, but I plan to make a better circuit later that's going to use a MOSFET. But for the moment, this is good enough to do the proof of concept to make sure it works. So anyway, this discharges the power, switches the power from, pretend this capacitor is a supercapacitor, which it isn't, it's just a standard capacitor. What happens is the power from the solar panel comes through this connection here. It goes through the second one and it charges up the capacitor. As soon as that capacitor and the voltage on the rail, the voltage on the main rails, which it supplies the circuit, gets to around 14 volts, it triggers a circuit which dumps the power from the supercapacitor down the yellow wire and into the boost converter, and basically shunts that energy into the battery that normally wouldn't be used. Basically that power, that's the voltage that's too low to actually charge a battery, it would have been wasted. So what I'm doing is making the most out of even cloudy days. So every so often when the supercapacitor gets charged up, it will shunt that energy to the supercapacitor. I think I explained that all pretty well. You'll have to forgive me, I've never used a phone before that it's got a camera on it, and I didn't realise you could pause it. So, right, okay, I figured that out. It's got a pause on there. So, right, I'm actually going to be making more videos from now on using this thing, but the quality is not that good, I know, but some of us don't have a great deal of money and can't really afford expensive cameras. This relay just operates when the voltage gets back down to about 4 volts. When it drops back down, because this is a test setup at the moment. Actually, the circuit's on a timer as well, so it cuts out and it charges back up again. Oh, it's charging. I think it's charging. Oh, it's still on. Actually, the relay's still on. Right. Yeah, I'm still designing this, and yeah, I'm going to pause a bit. I actually think I need to do some adjustments on here because it's all this. This is a breadboard. It's where you plug and play basically. You just plug capacitor. I'll just use this one over here as an example. I don't know if you've seen them. Electronics people know all about these things, but you just make a circuit. And it's a little bit like Lego, but for electronics, and you just build things and then test them out and then put them on a proper circuit board. Using an old panel, put a light on it. I'm using an old Farnell, very, very good meter. It's got a huge dial on it, so it's actually behind a stool, and it's an analog, and it's I can't really show you this. See if I can get this right. I don't know if you can see that, but it's an old Farnell. And they actually used to call them stabilized voltage instead of regulated. It's a type L3 or still works. I had to do some work on it. It had germanium transistors, and it has a big regulation knob at the back. Here we go. Can't get this. Farnell Instruments. Sound Beck. It's hard for me to see actually, but made in Yorkshire. And it's a very old thing, but it works good. And I'm still using that. I've currently got it unregulated so that I don't blow anything up. Okay, I'm making another video because that last one was a little bit long-winded. But right, I'm making a charge controller, and the way this works is on cloudy days when there's not enough power coming from the sun, the voltage might barely get high enough to charge a battery. It might get, say, to about 10 volts. Now, normally, if you put the 10 volts directly from the solar panel into a boost regulator, the problem is the boost regulator will pull down the voltage so much that most of the energy is wasted as heat, because it's having to step up the voltage of, say, 4 volts up to 12 volts. So you're losing a great deal of energy. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using my supercapacitors, which are, just a minute, the supercapacitors actually are under here. I've got a label stuck on there, and there's 6 of them, and each one's 2.7 volts. Now, because the voltage is only at 10 volts, obviously that's not enough voltage to charge a 12-volt battery. And currently the charge current that's going into the supercapacitors is 80 milliamps. So what I'm doing is I'm basically buffering that energy into the supercapacitors. And when it gets up to a certain level, hopefully higher than the 12-volt battery that I want to charge, the supercapacitors will be then fed using my circuit to the boost regulator, which will step up the voltage around about 12 volts and all the way down to 4 volts, back up to 12 volts, which I need to charge my battery. By doing it that way, I'm actually losing less power in the conversion ratio because of the fact that I'm not stepping up from such a low voltage, because I'm using the supercapacitors to redistribute that energy into my battery. So what happens is that the voltage comes into the circuit. It runs the relay, this board here, which is really ancient. It's from the 1980s, but I do plan to make a MOSFET driven one later, which won't be using a chunky relay, because the relay itself uses about 25-30 milliamps, which is quite greedy really. So, and at the moment it's oscillating, it's not turning off properly. I'm in the middle of setting this up as well, which is why I'm still developing this circuit over here, which obviously I will build a MOSFET circuit onto that at some point. But the idea is that there's one Zener diode here. That Zener diode is 15 volts. So if the voltage coming in from the solar panel is consistently above 15 volts, it will, through this resistor, charge this capacitor. This capacitor will then, through this resistor, and this is a 10 meg down to ground, it will go through this resistor and it will switch on this BC109C transistor, which will basically steal away, using on the collector, it will steal away the bias through this pot and this bridge and this other Zener diode. It will steal away the energy that would normally come through and turn on the second BC109, which you can't really see, it's underneath. The second BC109C actually triggers the circuit, which is a 555 timer. Now, if the voltage is consistently above 15 volts, then it's safe to say that we're getting enough power to not need to use the boost supercapacitors or the boost converter, in which case the relay circuit will never get energized, because the second BC109C will never get turned on, because if the 15 volts coming in is consistent, it will keep the circuit turned off. But if the voltage is consistently below 15 volts and it's barely enough to even charge the 12-volt battery, then the first BC109C will keep this transistor turned off so that the power can actually energize this circuit and periodically kick the relay in when the voltage is high enough. The reason it's oscillating at the moment is only because I'm not using a supercapacitor on this in here, which is what's supposed to be here. I'm using an ordinary capacitor just to test the circuit out. I don't want to be playing around with huge amounts of amps and blow something up, obviously. So I'm using a very low, I think it's a 4,700 microfarad capacitor. I can't really, I think I can see it. No, it's one way up. Right. I've just been moving some things around because I wanted to get this probe lead out of the way, so I've just made a jumper lead across. Right, okay. It's a little bit more stable now. trouble is when you get everything bunched together, like this transistor, there's a risk of shorting out the base to the case of the collector because these metal can BC109Cs, they can be a bit of a, yeah, you can have a disaster if you short the collector, especially if it's directly to supply, but in this case it's not, it's actually connected to a resistor, so we should be quite safe. Right, it's still not going off. I want to get the voltage up to about, I want it to actually charge up, turn on the relay, and then turn off until it's charged up again. Well, this is what appears to be happening, but it appears to be happening too soon. So, I was just going to adjust this preset. Let's try and actually, oh, it's still on. Right, actually I'll put it on the scope while we're doing that. Right. Voltage is about 11.64. I'm going to see if I can. It's still on a timer circuit, so I'm going to increase the speed of the timer. I'm going to turn it down to minimum, so oscillate much faster now. It's right. We see we're getting a much faster trigger now. We just adjust this until it stays off. Oh, that's the wrong way. Damn it. I've got this little sleeve over my screwdriver. I put this plastic sleeve in. It helps to keep the screwdriver on the nub of this little screw here. It works quite well normally. Let's get this to stay off. I'm probably going to have to use a logic circuit, so if my hand's drifting off the scope, I better pause this actually. Kind of boring. Right, I've got this working now, but the trick is to get the meter in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it up incrementally, right? I'm going to show you the meter. It's at 12.38. The oscilloscope. Now as I turn the voltage up, you'll notice that it starts to climb. Right, it's actually 1 volt. 1 volt now there above the center line. Oh, it's actually dropped a bit. But the meter's now reading 13.94 volts. Now, if I go back, and I'm actually adjusting the voltage down here. And that's actually set on current for the moment. So, if I turn it up a bit more, oh god, this is I need to have 6 limbs. Right. I certainly don't want 6 limbs though. Right, if I turn the voltage up a bit more, it's at 14.51. 14.84. Now this reading on the scope is actually the base of the transistor that I'm measuring. So now the meter reads 14.99 volts, that's 15 volts. Now, at 50, if you remember, at 15 volts, when I get to 15 volts, that is when the first transistor is triggered by this 15 volt Zener, and it automatically disables the second transistor from being activated. Now, unfortunately, I've turned this pot all the way down, which means that it didn't come on when it should have done. So now if I turn this pot back now at that threshold, 14.99, I put my screwdriver on there and I go back to the scope, we should see that line increase. We should have 3 divisions for it to trigger. Each division is set to 2 volts, so that's 2, 4, 6. So we should be just over, as I increase this pot, it's going up. Right, as I increase it, we should trigger. When it does, you'll see it drop. There we go. Right, so we've got the relay triggering again. But remember, I'm only using a small capacitor, and this oscillation problem won't be an issue with the supercapacitors. It will simply stay on and discharge the supercapacitors. But it will also give the other capacitors on this circuit here a chance to discharge and equalize. But because it's oscillating on here, it's not really giving anything a chance to equalize. But if you look at the voltage, each time it's triggered, the voltage drops. That's because my supply is current limited. It's actually set on 220, I think it's about 30 milliamps, I think. I have to see this light. Put to voltage, and the voltage I'm sending in, as you can see, it keeps swinging. It's swinging because of the current limitation. When the relay activates, it's kind of useful actually, because the relay is drawing the current and pulling the voltage back down. So when the relay activates, it pulls the voltage back down, which gives me the ability to check my circuit. But normally, if I increase the timing threshold on here, let's see, it's way out of the way for time. This is the timing. This is how long it stays on for. Turn it clockwise. I'll get this rubber thing out of the way so we can see. Right, that's fast. Turn it clockwise, and that's the longer duration. So that sets the 555 to stay on a lot longer. Set it higher up. This relay now should stay on until it gets this voltage down to a fair amount. Obviously, it's not going to go down too far because I'm not drawing a lot of current. But if I get my boost converter now, if I connect this to some batteries, I will get some realistic results. So let's try that. I'll just pause a minute. Right, I've connected the boost converter to these batteries here, but I'm not really worried about setting the voltage up simply because the only amount of power that the batteries are going to get is a pulse, basically, a pulse of about 15 volts from these capacitors, which is not going to charge the batteries in any way whatsoever. But basically, it's come back on there, it's come off, it come back on again, because the actual circuit charged up pretty quickly. I need to actually turn my current down again, I think. Came on quicker than normal. It's probably because but there's more power actually in the batteries. Keeping the capacitor charged up on the boost regulator. There's actually more power in the batteries, as I say, than what's coming through, because this is pulsing a small amount of current, because it's just a 4,700 microfarad capacitor, and that's all it can basically shunt through to this boost regulator, so it's not going to do any harm anywhere. But I just wanted to simulate a battery being on the end, even though I'm not actually going to be charging it, because this is positive supply here is never directly through here. It goes to the capacitor, and then the capacitor is switched through to the boost converter. So it's either one or the other. It's not both. Right. I need to get that clear in my head because I don't want to blow myself up. So, right, the voltage seems to be stuck. And the oscilloscope, it's still at 0 line. Yeah, the only reason it's stuck actually is because I've set it at current limited. Now, ideally, when it's current limited, I want it to, rather than getting stuck on, which is what it is, I simply don't want it to come on at all, which is the problem I'm having right now. So, yeah, I've still got some work to do. I basically need to adjust the components on my, because it's an analog circuit, there's nothing digital here, but I'm not a digital person. Right, it went off again then, it just came back on. So I'm going to have to figure out, I think what I need to do is, I need to separate a little bit. I need to have a bit more of a gap between the first transistor, which disables, and the second transistor, which enables the on time. So I'm using Zener diodes. There's two Zener diodes here. These two are in series. There's that one there, and that's in series with this blue one here. And when the voltage gets, these two Zener diodes are basically setting the on threshold when it comes on, and they go through a resistor and a preset, and to the base of the transistor. And the base of the collector of the transistor goes to the trigger input of the 555 timer. Now, originally on this board, it was using a capacitor down there, and you don't have to use decoupling on the 555 timer. You can have pin 2 directly to ground, you know, if you want to turn it on permanently. So I've simply bypassed that with a link underneath, because obviously the voltage that's coming in on the supercapacitors will be very gradual, very slow. So it won't be a pulse, it will be a linear, steady charge. So the capacitor would kind of never work. So I've had to bridge that. So it might be one of the reasons why I'm getting some spurious triggers, but I'll figure it out. Right, okay, this is part 3. I've decided to do it in parts. It'll make it easy for editing later. Now, what I was finding, I set the current limit back up because it helps to simulate. It helps to simulate more accurately the voltage drop that would actually naturally occur across the solar panels. So basically, when the relay is on, it pulls the voltage down and discharges the power supply, which is actually through this huge capacitor over here. I've got a really big BC capacitor. Let's see, get some light on it. And it's 4,700 microfarad, 100 peak voltage, 100 volts. It can handle 100 amps, and that's what's the current limited power supply, which is set to about, I think it's about, I've got it set at about 20 milliamps or something. hard to see from here. But that charges up this big capacitor here, and that capacitor supplies my circuit over here on the breadboard. It supplies this particular circuit around here, plus it supplies this board with a relay. Now, as you can see, the scope is actually, the trigger voltage is actually, let's see, 2, 4, 6. Ooh, it's right on the cusp of triggering the relay, and the voltage is now at 14.97. And I wanted to simulate bright sunshine, you know, when you get clouds and the sun comes out really bright. So I put a 1 microfarad capacitor in parallel with that, I think it's 68k. There we go, the relay just kicked in. So there we go, it's working. I'm happy with that. I've got it pretty well tuned now. So what basically happens is the capacitor is 1 microfarad. That triggers the transistor which turns off or disables the relay. So what happens then is it gets, say you get some bright sunshine and the sun comes out really bright and the voltage shoots up rapidly, and because it's shooting up quite rapidly, the power of the 1 microfarad capacitor will pulse quite heavily the BC109C, which steals away the bias from the second BC109C, which is the one that normally triggers the relay, or the time circuit which triggers the relay. So this actually makes it easier to automatically prevent the circuit from tripping, rather, the relay coming on. So as the voltage actually increases gradually and it approaches the threshold of about 14 volts, and it doesn't get much higher than that, which was what you would get in without sunlight, you know, when it's not very sunny. I might even only get 12, but because it rises slowly, then I don't actually get the disabled effect with the 1 microfarad over here, the 1 microfarad capacitor. So there's actually a 10 mega resistor there just to pull that down to ground to just discharge it, equalize things if the voltage is dropped. So anyway, pause there. I know someone did a pause at the relay snapped off. As you can see, it's right below 15 volts. It's 14.97. Now, in theory, I want the relay to trigger on at this point, but it's not. But it's right on the threshold. It's 246 volts, and it appears to be creeping up very slowly, which is great, because as soon as this voltage gets to the threshold, we should dump all the power out of the supercapacitors into my boost charger. Now I'm seeing a little dip there. That might be because it's about to trip. Every time I move the camera away, it does it, you know. I'm always missing it. It's probably going to go any minute. Right, so it's on now. Voltage is dropping down, simulating the discharge of the supercapacitors. Simulation, I must emphasize this is a simulation I'm doing. Now the supercapacitors would drop right down to a point where the boost converter could no longer supply the charge, at which point the timer will time out, and if it doesn't time out, the voltage to the timer will drop below a point where it no longer works anyway, at which point the LED will go out. It's already very dimly lit anyway, it's hardly noticeable. As soon as that goes out, then the whole process begins again. So in cloudy weather, when there's not much sun, the supercapacitors will charge up very, very, very slowly. May even take 2 hours on a very dull, foggy day. Because I don't know if you know what the weather's like over here in the UK, but it's extremely cloudy at the moment. We've got workmen outside doing scaffolding, and a bit noisy. So let's see what else it actually seems to have got stuck around there. But it's because my current limiting on the power supply is not perfect. It tends to fluctuate a bit. I want it to go down so that it will reset. Well, the only other way I can do this is to actually put my jumper on. Oh, there we go. It just went. Okay, there we go. I was just going to bypass it and it beat me to it. So it does work. Right, the voice is climbing. There we go. Relay come back on. That's what I want. And the voice is dropping again. Yeah. I missed it on the scope. I can't film the meter and the scope out at the same time with this camera, unfortunately. I've only got one. Actually, I do have another camera I could use, I suppose. Anyway, it's working. And when I get this super capacitor on here, I'll be able to really test it out properly. Well, I was having some problems yesterday with my circuit, and what I've done is, because basically what was happening was the driver transistor, the one that activates, oh sorry, it's this one, the one that activates the relay, it was actually coming on too quickly. So what I've done here is I added a nice chunky capacitor. It's about 470 microfarad. And what happens is it's connected to this resistor here. I think it's about 3K, so I can't see it actually. I don't like these blue resistors, they're very hard to read. But anyway, it basically takes a while to charge this capacitor, and this is connected to the base of the transistor. So if the voltage on the supercapacitors, for example, is actually coming up quite quickly, then it will take time for this capacitor to charge, in which case the circuit doesn't get activated, and as a result the voltage reaches the 17 or 18 volts, which is what I want to run the MPPT, maximum peak power transfer circuit, which I normally use. But actually we're getting some sun today. We can see some sun shining through. And now the thing is, if we're getting a good sunshine, then we don't need to use the boost converter, which is down here, the step up. I think I need to call the camera the right way around actually. So, and because we're getting more power, because we're getting more power, we don't have to worry too much about using the reservoir in the supercapacitors. Now I've actually got two traces set up on my scope now, so this is interesting. You'll notice that the bottom trace, this one, let's move it a bit. The bottom trace, I need to calibrate these just a minute. Let's just zero them both out. Top trace, let's just move that above. So it's actually on just above that line. And the bottom trace, let's just move that just above, below that line. Right. At the moment, Oh no, that's wrong actually. Yeah, the bottom trace needs to be way down here. Right. I'll explain that in a minute. Now, the bottom trace represents cutting off the driver for the second transistor. So if the voltage, if it's a cloudy day and we don't get much sunshine, and the maximum voltage I'm really seeing from the solar panels is around 12 volts, then it's dumped into the supercapacitors. When voltage gets to a certain point, this transistor kicks in, activates the relay. The power that was accumulated through this connection here, there we go, it's actually come on now. The power is dumped into the boost converter. Now, if the sunshine it comes up quite quickly, then this transistor, because the capacitor is slowing this one from activating, this one kicks in and disables the supercapacitor from dumping the power into the boost converter. Right, okay. So, let's see now. So anyway, at the moment, actually, the relay is activated. Let's just check this is zeroed out. I think actually that's because the bottom line, the disabled circuit, is no longer active. It's just turned off now. The relay, it's come back on again. Well, I'm almost there. So what I'm going to do is turn the power off and reset things. So I'm going to turn the power off on the voltage, which is current limited. So let's let that die down. And the scope should equalize. I'm using a little diode. It's a germanium diode here, which I've got wired onto the bottom track of here, which is on a wire up to the base of the first transistor. And that basically when this transistor is activated, it actually discharges the transistor capacitor over here, the big one, because that capacitor is supplying the base through a resistor, and it makes it easier to discharge the capacitor to basically reset the circuit. So I'm just waiting for this voltage to drop right down. And 1.64. Right, now if I just turn on, we should be okay now to turn it back on. I need to set my current limit as well. So I want it to come up nice and slowly. So I'm just going to set the current limit right the way down the back, which is hard to see. Right, I'm turning this on. Right, we're not going to see anything on the meter much. I'm just going to turn it up until get a slight amount of movement. Oops, too much. Just want a tiny amount, about 50 milliamps. Right, the voltage is coming up. The relay is not activated. Look at the scope. The disabled circuit is which is which? Yeah, the disabled circuit is activated at the moment. The voltage is now at 17 volts. So at some point that disabled circuit should drop back down. When the voltage is high, the bottom line should stay up, preventing the top the transistor from activating the relay. Now, if I turn the voltage down so it simulates a cloudy day, if I turn this voltage down, we should actually see the relay become activated. So let's just do that now. I'll just put it on the scope. So I'm just going to 16.78, 16.69. Now, I'll go a bit lower. If it's a cloudy day, right, 15.16, right, 14.6, Now that Zener diode should no longer be working for the high voltage detection. So the bottom line is dropping, the top line is climbing, and this relay should come on at any moment. And the voltage at the moment is 14.75. So simulating an overcast day with the capacitors charged up, this relay should be activated at any moment. But I've made a delay. There's quite a significant delay, simply because the supercapacitors will charge up much more slowly than these test capacitors I've got wired up. And obviously it needs to function over long duration time periods. And 1475 scope, the top beam is very high. It might be that the voltage is still a little bit too high for it to trigger actively. So I'm just going to turn the voltage down a little bit more. To simulate overcast weather. Now hopefully this relay will come on. So I've got this wire in the way. Ah, there we go, it's just done it now. There we go. Kicks in, discharges the power, the scope. It's showing the bottom beam is for the disabling the relay, the top beam is for activating the relay, and as you can see the top beam is actually falling again because the battery voltage, the stored power is now being drained by the relay. So, yeah, the top beam is definitely coming right down now. The relay is still on. I mean, this is pretty much an analog circuit. I'm not using digital apart from the 555 timer, which has probably got some digital stuff in there. But, right. I just want to speed things up a bit. Oh, there we go. The relay's gone off. Now let's watch this. The voltage is coming up again, which is going to excel. Right, the top one is going to be reactivated. It's at 14.9 volts. Now, if the voltage doesn't continually climb to above 15 volts, which is what that first Zener here, this first Zener here is a 50 volt Zener, and that's the one that goes through this preset to the first transistors to disable the boost converter. So as long as we're below 15 volts, that circuit should not actually come into effect. Now, according to the scope, the top beam is definitely close to activation, and the disabled circuit at the bottom is not active. So if I turn the voltage back up again, and if we achieve more than 15 volts, now if you look now, the bottom beam has now come up. The bottom beam, which is disabling the boost conversion from being active, has now come up. So the top beam is actually falling. Turn the voltage back down again, so we'll go below 15. Now if you look, the bottom beam has dropped off, the top beam is high, which is exactly the thing I'm looking for. So I'll do this while I've got it on the scope, if I can hold it steady, turning the voltage up. We're at 14.5, 14.84, 15.20, 15.51. Right, there you go. The disabled circuit is now active at around 15 volts, so that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. I just want to make sure that the circuit itself will not get stuck on a threshold point and not be able to trip. But I do suspect that we are close to getting the circuit tuned right, so I need to get this disabled part out again. So it's going to drop. Right, there we go. So we're 14 point. I'm just going to take it down to 14 volts. Stimulate very low solar power. Right, we've got 14 volts now, which is below that Zener diode. As you can see on the scope, the disabled transistor, the transistor disabling the boost conversion is now at 0 volts on the base, and the trigger to activate the timer circuit is now at about 2, 4, 6, about 0.6 volts, because the oscilloscope is set on 0.2. Volts division is 0.2, and can't get this other. It's very bad lighting in here, so that should make it a bit easier. So at 0.2 volts, I'm using a very slow time base anyway, because I'm only measuring DC, so we're not going to get any waveforms. But right, so if we see we're at 14 volts and it's not activated. Now if I go and tune my pot, maybe I can get this to activate now. Just trying to get my nub on the screwdriver there. If I can just get my screwdriver in there, hopefully I can just tune this. Top one. Obviously we're waiting for that capacitor, this big chunky one, to charge as well. And that's the reason why there's a slight delay. So I've actually turned up the preset a bit more. It's basically waiting to see if it activates. But in bright sunshine, if the voltage was charging the supercapacitor at a high rate, then we need this space. We need this time span delay to give it a chance to reach 16 volts. And if it doesn't reach 16 volts in an allocated amount of time, then we want this boost. We want this relay to kick in and basically say, look, I'm tired of waiting. I'm waiting for the sun. It's not coming. I'm going to dump this energy into the boost converter down here, because we're not going to get what we want unless we use this energy it's already stored, rather than just going to waste. So anyway, basically that's where I am at the moment with this little thing. Oh, my motor project, I don't know, I haven't really shown anyone on YouTube, but I'm actually building a pulse motor, and at its early stages. I've just been doing the coils. I haven't done any more work on it at the moment because, well, my solar power was not, I wasn't happy with my solar power on these cloudy days, so I was like, well, I'm going to put that priority because that's something that's already wants sorting out anyway. And this is unknown, too many unknowns with the pulse motor thing. It might be a complete waste of time, you never know, so I'm not going to waste all my time on that at the moment. But we still haven't got it to trigger. Now, maybe I can check the voltage on this capacitor over here, and it might be that the threshold just wants tuning a bit more. Oh, if I turn this voltage down a fraction more, let's see, about 13 volts. See if the relay kicks in at 13.5. Right, it's hard to get it exactly right, but Let's give it a little while and see. We've got 2, 4, 6. That's actually a bit high there, so this relay should activate at any moment, really. Right, okay, so I got it tuned. I put this germanium diode in, actually. I mean, it messed things up because I had it connected to the wrong pin. This little germanium diode basically is connected to the capacitor, so that if the voltage drops on the voltage rails to below the voltage of what's in the capacitor, it will discharge the capacitor. Otherwise, it basically resets the circuit. So if the voltage, say the sun goes down completely and or the circuit's discharged, I want this capacitor to be reset. I don't want it holding 13 volts because it interferes with the timing circuit the next time that the sun comes up. So I put this germanium diode in, but accidentally I wouldn't connected it between the positive of the capacitor. Instead of it going back to supply, I actually had it going, what was it, down here somewhere? I put it to the collector of the transistor which triggers the relay, and that kind of messed things up a bit. So, yeah, I thought, well, I can discharge it with that transistor. Well, I can't because it was preventing it from triggering the 555 timer. So anyway, I've redone that back again. So now it seems to be working the way it's supposed to do. I'm currently, obviously, we'll be waiting for that capacitor to charge up at the moment. I'm just waiting for it to trigger. I haven't got my other meter connected to the capacitor, but I could do that. Right, I've been trying to think of a way to. It occurred to me that when as my voltage is increasing on the supercapacitors, well, these are just ordinary ones, obviously, but yeah. As the voltage is increasing, the problem would be to determine if the voltage was going to continue to increase above the 15 volt threshold. Now, if my circuit was to dump the power into the supercapacitors prematurely without giving the circuit a chance to reach the MPPT, then basically the circuit would be triggered prematurely. So I thought I was having to think about this. So if you know how a current limiting circuit works, it uses a transistor and you have a resistor, and then you have a voltage drop across the resistor, and the voltage drop basically determines the current limit. Well, I thought, well, maybe I could use something similar to that. So what I did was I put 2 diodes here. This is just a test. And as the voltage on the input is charging, then the voltage on this side of the diode, and this is in series with this diode, will be higher than the voltage on the receiving end that's charging the supercapacitors. Now, as long as the voltage is higher on this side than this side, then the voltage will come down this resistor. I've got a jumper there. It will go to the base of a PNP transistor, which will keep the transistor turned off, and the collector will be basically at 0.01 or something. Now, as soon as the voltage differential is either the same on both sides, or, well, it can't be the same because of the voltage drop across these diodes, which is a bit of a problem. But I could use a high trickle charge resistor across those, I suppose. But anyway, as long as the voltage is more or less equal, the transistor will stay in an off state. But as soon as the voltage on the charged supercapacitors is actually higher on this side than it is on the solar power side, then it would, if it's below my 15 volt threshold, that's a bit higher than 15 at the moment, but if it's higher, then even if this transistor comes on, it will not trigger the circuit. But if, however, the voltage is lower than 15 volts, then I can take the voltage from the PNP on the collector and use that to trigger an NPN transistor, which will complete the circuit for my BC109C, which will be the one which turns on the relay, if you see what I mean. So, instead of having the BC109C going directly to ground, I'll take the emitter from the BC109C and feed it into a collector of an NPN transistor, which will be driven by this PNP. Anyway, that is what I'm thinking. So I've got BC182L here. Oh, it's a bit hard to see. Focus on this camera is not very good. Anyway, it's a BC182L. Oh damn it! I've got mixed up now. Which is way around. Let's see. I'll put it in my transistor checker. It's easier. It's got a gain of 196 about. So base is on the left. Collectors in the middle. Emitters on the right. So if I put this, actually I'll swap it around because I've got a nice jumper down here I can use. So if I just swap this around and I'll pop it in here. Right. Now all I need now is a resistor that's not particularly something that's going to go for between the collector of the PMP, which is up here next to this link, and the base of the NPN 182L. So, and these resistors are very hard to read, but I'm just going to pause a minute now. Right, this is actually, I looked under the magnifying glass, it appears to be 260 kilo ohms, so that should work. Just need to straighten the light on it. Right, if I stick that in here, between the collector of the PMP and the base of the NPN. Right, I'm all thumbs today. The circuit's live at the moment, by the way, so I have to be a little bit careful, not too much, so there's no interference from that. Right, that's that connected. And then I need to take the ground wire that's on my first transistor, which is this one. I removed that jumper. Now I'm going to have to find a nice long... Actually, I know what I can do. I'll use this one and put that between the collector of the 182L and the emitter of the BC109C. And spend my way with it. There's no sparks flying. I certainly forgot to put my meter back onto volts, and I hope I haven't loaded anything on my meter. Okay, so with a bit of luck, actually I took a link out on the, it was monitoring the voltage on the collector of the PMP, so I'm just going to stick something in there which I can, I want a nice long, something that's got a long, here we go, another jumper up here. I'll just get this red lead and I'll stick this between the collector of the 182L and over here, so I can monitor the voltage on the base of the 182L on my meter, which is currently at 0.401, but it's dropping because it's what was in that capacitor. So, right, that's now for a little test. I disabled my circuit at the moment because the wire's actually not in the right hole, so I'm going to reactivate my circuit now. Put it in the positive. Now, nothing should happen now until two things happen, and that's the peak waveform at the top, which is the turn on voltage of the, there we go, the wheel is activated. Right, okay, that's working. So the, so you like it when things go right. So that my transistor is still able to turn on, because now the emitter is going through the collector, so it's only happening at when the voltage is at a certain threshold. Now, if this voltage, which is climbing again now, does not reach the threshold voltage of when I want it to turn on, it shouldn't turn the relay on. Now, if I was to turn the voltage back a little bit, because as I say, you did see it was about 15 volts, I think, before, so it was quite high. So if I turn this back a bit, on the analog meter, because it's actually climbing at the moment, so if I turn that back a bit, right, about 12 something. 10, 11, 12, is it? I think it's about there. Come on out. Battery. Yes, I've got about 12.29. Now, if the voltage is quite low, it shouldn't turn on my relay. Oh God, something weird's going on with my oscilloscope now. This is weird. This is a bit crazy. What's going on my oscilloscope? Actually, let's see, AC. Oh, my trigger voltage has gone way off the scale. Oh, and that's probably because the transistor, which I've just fitted, is not active. Therefore, it's disabled the trigger voltage. Therefore, the base voltage on my BC109C will be getting a lot higher now, because it's not being allowed to conduct, and that's good. So, because the BC109C is not being able to complete its job, because the emitter is going to the collector of the BC182L, because this is high, this is open circuit effectively, the base voltage on my 109C is going to be a lot higher until either the primary voltage drops through my diodes. Let's try that out. If I was to turn the voltage down quite rapidly, it might trigger this. There we go. It activated. So my analog circuit is working now. Voltage is just recharging now. So in theory, when it gets back up to, you can just see the top of the waveform up there. It's actually a bit high, so I'm going to just zero that out. You could see it now. So the trigger voltage for the relay on times at the top, and the disabled, when the voltage is above 15 volts, this will move up to disable it, but this is not in the disable mode because we're nowhere near the 15 volt threshold at the moment. You see what, 9.19. So if I increase the voltage slowly down here, we're currently rated at about 20 milliamps or something. Turn the voltage up. Now let's go and look at the meter. Actually seeing the voltage come up slowly. Simulating solar power. Now if we keep going up, we want to be able to reach our threshold of above 15 volts for the MPPT. As long as the voltage is a positive voltage, we should the current limit is actually making it very, very slow at the moment. But in theory, when we get near the 15 volts, the bottom line, to disable the activation of the circuit, that should trigger. But the top line has disappeared off the scale again because the BC182L is now preventing this from being activated unless either the voltage stops below the 15 volt threshold or the voltage drops below the 15 volt threshold, in which case it will activate the circuit, which is good. So I'm still actually, I don't know, we seem to stop. My current limiter is a little bit, well, it's a bit haphazard on this old panel power supply. It's got an old wire wound current limiter on there. I'm thinking about updating that to a multi-turn or something at some point. I'll save my power on that. What I'll do now is I'll turn off the power supply, let that drop. And now there you go, it's activated, and that's what I want. Simulation of sunlight going down. So activated. Now if I turn it back on again, it should slowly climb back up. Look at the scope. Once you see the top line go off the scale, that's because that's the normal point where it would have activated. But the BC182L, there it's going now. It would normally have activated prematurely there because we don't even know if we're going to reach 15 volts. And because it's still climbing, I wanted to see if it would reach the voltage threshold where the MPPT can do its job. There's still some work to do on my circuit so that when the voltages are equalized, now I could possibly use a capacitor to detect small fluctuation in voltage on the base of the PMP. I basically want it, if the voltage is stuck at a certain point, let's just turn the voltage up a bit more if I can. Oh, it's current limited, it won't go any higher. I have to adjust the current limited. I'm going to have to turn that up a little bit. Well, that's kind of curious. So this far now, as soon as I switch down to current setting, the voltage starts to climb again. So, yeah, there's definitely some some strange things with this far now. I work 14.50. Let's just turn it up a bit. We're going up. And the relay is still not activated. And with the disabled, voltage is now come up, which is good, because that's when the MPPT would kick in and have enough juice to operate. And because I noticed with this MPPT circuit, which I've got, the problem with it is the actually I'll show you that just in a minute. Right, there's the voltage I'm currently getting that's stored in my supercapacitors, and the sun's gone in, so it's dark outside. This is the voltage that's being wasted. It's what's been left in my supercapacitors. This is what I've been talking about. Energy that's basically sat there and is not being used by the MPPT. The MPPT has got a little LED on there. You can't really see from here, but there's a tiny LED that's just above that little blue thing that lights up red when there's power there, and then when the voltage gets above about, it's actually upside down, when the voltage gets above about 14, 15 volts, it actually kicks in, and that's when it starts to charge the batteries. And the problem with it is the voltage below that, it doesn't seem to do bugger all, because there seems to be a voltage drop of about 1.5 to 2 volts between the input and the output, which is annoying, and it's a bit of a waste. So, and when the voltage on the output gets to the charge voltage, the LED turns blue. So that is kind of useful when you've got bright sunlight, but when you've got dim sunlight or you've got power that's not being used, it's a bit of a waste. So I want to dump the extra power, the residual power, into my supercapacitors, and when there's sufficient, run it through this boost converter, which is covered up in heat sinks actually at the moment. I've got little homemade heat sinks on there. I think you understand what I'm doing now. The MPPT can only really work when it has a sufficient voltage, and when it's not working, then all that power is being wasted, and my circuit seems to be working quite well, because at 14.62 the bottom line on the scope is the disabled voltage. Now if I turn the voltage down now on the meter, which is actually on current setting at the moment, that's voltage. So if I turn it down to, well, it's going to take a while because it's on a capacitor bank. So the voltage is dropping. Relay activates, dumps that energy into the boost step up regulator. Voltage starts climbing again in the supercapacitors, which is the idea, and providing it's a positive gain, the circuit remains off. But if the voltage stops at around 12, 13 volts, which is not enough to run the MPT, at that point I want the boost converter to utilize that energy and dump it into a battery. Right. Okay, I think I explained it better this time, because some of my other videos are not very clear. So 12.56, let's just turn up the voltage again a bit more, keep on climbing. The trigger, let's just set this to a different setting actually on the scope. Let's put it to 0.5 and the other one on 0.5 because I'll just zero this out. Zero this out on that line and zero the other one out on the center line. Put them back on DC. Now hopefully they won't go off the scale now, because when it goes right off the scopes I can't see where they are. So the top line we're at about 12.55. So it's in the range where it could activate the relay, but if there's still a positive gain, then it won't. But as soon as the voltages are equalized, then the BC182L should trigger the relay circuit. I've just been doing some thinking and a little bit more thinking. Now at the moment, as the voltage is charging, it goes through this resistor and it keeps this transistor turned off. But once the voltage stabilizes, like I said before, it takes a voltage dip on this side of the transistor for this PMP to turn on and then trigger the 182L. However, I want it to actually trigger if the voltage is stagnant below the 15 volts. Well, obviously my circuit is not going to do that, because I've been doing some thinking on this and it's not going to work. Now, what I have to change is that instead of having this resistor, what I need is a capacitor that will be positively biased to keep this transistor from turning off during the charging of the supercapacitors. So which means that what I need to do to make this work is to replace this resistor with a capacitor and set a bias resistor between the base of the PMP and ground. A high value resistor, something like mega ohms or something, so that as long as there's a positive voltage coming in, it will keep that biasing at bay, basically negate it from turning on the transistor. Then as soon as the voltage stops, the capacitor will equalize. The bias on the PMP will therefore then be able to activate the 182L, and the 182L will be able to trigger the BC109C, which activates the trigger for the 555 timer circuit. Okay, provided of course the voltage does not exceed 15 volts. If 15 volts is exceeded, then the disabled transistor BC109C would activate and prevent the trigger from happening. Okay, so I've figured that out. If anyone's asking for a diagram, there's no diagram yet. I'm just working this all out in my head. So let's go and reconfigure this. I'll have to pause for a while because I need all my fingers. Right, so now what I have now is about 1 mega ohm. It's about 1 mega ohm resistor between the base of the PMP. So now what happens is, as the voltage climbs, a positive voltage is going through the capacitor to the base of the PMP, keeping it turned off. Now once the voltage stops, it should activate as soon as that capacitor equalizes, provided the voltage is below 15, and there we go. It works. So as soon as the positive gain voltage stops below that threshold, which is what I want, it will activate the relay. Now if we look at the scope, and we watch the trigger line, which is the top line, the voltage is increasing now, the trigger line should start to increase. It is increasing. Well, 12 volts nearly. Well, it's actually 11. There we go, 11.96 volts. The relay just kicked in. I've actually got the voltage on the meter quite low though at the moment. So if I put it back on current, actually I need to turn the voltage to about a bit more. So we continue to have a positive gain, so that we do not actually trigger this time. It gives it a chance for the voltage to exceed the amount the MPPT needs. Oh, it's actually stopped again because the voltage. I'll put it back on current, so it should actually continue to rise on the next cycle. Right. So hopefully the voltage will continue to rise past 15, and the relay should not activate. Obviously, oh, it did activate. Right. Okay. So maybe I need to increase that resistor even higher, something like a 10 mega ohm. I'll go and have a look for one of those. Oh, right, in my mega resistor pack, I should be able to find something that will do the job. It'll save me having to have a humongous capacitor. You can find a higher value that's just enough to trigger that transistor. Well, that's done it. I have a 10 mega ohm. Oh God, I can't get that properly. 10 mega ohm resistor between the base of the EMP and ground. And now I'm just using a tiny 10 microfarad, 10 volt, between the incoming positive going supply voltage, which basically goes across some droppers, well, some resistor networks for now, and so these diodes, to keep this transistor turned off until the voltage either stops being positive going, or becomes negative on this side, in which case it triggers and dumps the power from the supercapacitors into the boost regulator. So, it does appear to be doing the job, because as soon as the voltage gets to around, I think it's around 14 or something, I'll turn it down a little bit, so it triggers at around 13 when it stops going past 13 volts, somewhere around about there. Slowing down. Capacitor on here is charging up. Sorry, the capacitor is charging on the, there you go, relay activated. So that circuit's working. So when this capacitor here, the blue one, is fully charged and equalized between the incoming voltage and the voltage source in the capacitors, that's when the transistor turns on through this 10 mega ohm resistor, triggering the 182L. The 182L completes the circuit for the BC109C, which is on the trigger circuit for the 555 timer. So, and as I say, that's this one, and that's the disabled transistor. That disables the circuit when it gets past 15, so the MPPT can work properly. So anyway, it seems to be doing the job. So as long, when the gain stops increasing, if it doesn't continue to increase, obviously this is based on current, so if you're getting 500 milliamps coming in at a quite a gradual ratio, then there's going to be there's going to be a greater difference between the voltage across this capacitor. So it's going to be much more positive gain than what I've got on this tiny circuit at the moment. So it's certainly working at the moment. Right, okay, I've put my meters next to each other. It makes it a bit easier to see what's going on. As the voltage is climbing on the Academy meter on the left, the bias voltage is on the meter on the right for the transistor which activates the relay. Well, rather, when the voltage is the voltage gain stops, the transistor on the right should activate the circuit that triggers the relay. Now, as long as there's a gain on the left-hand meter, the right meter shouldn't move much. Now, as you can see, the voltage is stopping on the left-hand meter, and now the relay operates. So, I've actually been playing around. I put this is mega. I think it's oh God, I've forgotten what it is now. 1.5. No, sorry, it's 3 point something mega ohm. I think. Can't really see the value actually. I've just put the damn thing in, and I can't even remember now. See if I can get my magnifying glass to work on the camera. Actually, that would be interesting. Right. Is this going to work on the camera? For some reason, magnifying glasses just do not seem to work on cameras, and I don't know why that is. But at least I can get the focus. That's good. It does help with the focus when you're close up. That's good. That's worth knowing. So it might get blurry when I zoom in this way, but when I use the magnifying glass, it actually aids in the focus. Yeah, my breadboard is very mucky actually. It wants to be clean. It's been collecting dust on the shelf for God knows how long. I haven't really been doing electronics much in the last few years. So it's actually working at the moment. As long as I've got a voltage gain. I moved my probe lead for the bias on the transistor for the right-hand side meter. I moved the probe lead to directly to the base of the BT182L because before I was actually measuring before the transistor, and so we were getting really high voltages there, obviously, and that was kind of confusing. So I'm directly monitoring the BC182L now, which makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. As you see, the voltage slows down on the meter on the left, and then it activates, and that's what I want. Because, well, it's current really, it's relative to current, because if the current is slowing down on charging the supercapacitors or stops, then I might as well dump what's in the supercapacitors into the boost converter rather than just letting it sit there idle. So, I'm just going to pause a minute. Right. I've increased the current on the power supply that's charging this circuit. I've just increased it a slight amount because it did trip quite easily before. It was stopping quite prematurely. So I want to see what will happen now. I've increased the current to the entire circuit, everything that's coming from the power supply down there, to about, you don't get this, I think it's about 20 milliamps. Let's see, 10, 20, 30, 40. It's about 15 milliamps, I think. Maybe. So anyway, it's hard for me to see this. But, right, so if I go back to voltage, actually. Voltage, as you can see, it's climbing. Oh, it's actually, no, it's going down at the moment. Trouble is, if I turn up the current too much, then it doesn't fall far back enough. Also, the relay just released. The relay released. Voltage is climbing on the meters over here. I can see them. So, about 14.10. And so this is about to trigger. There we go. Right. See if I can push this envelope a little bit more. See what happens if we go head for 15 volts and plus 15. See if it still triggers the relay, but it's still discharging right now. So just waiting for this relay to go off. It's certainly not oscillating like it did before. It's driving me batty. It kept going on and off, on and off, on and off when it wasn't supposed to. And of course, the circuit's getting more and more complicated. Everything really between this point here, everything between this point here, all the way back here, including these diodes up here, everything around here is all the circuit I'm working on. You can ignore everything else that's above here, everything else except for that, that's just a link to scope probe. But obviously it'll be a lot smaller on a circuit board once I build one. Get my etching solution out and ferric chloride and relay still on right now. I'm just waiting for that to click off. I think the voltage dropped too much. Okay, we're going up. 15. Now it's not supposed to activate the relay at the moment if it's at 15 volts. Oh good. It's not triggered so far. At 15 volts we're not supposed to see the relay activated. I might be a little bit close though because of the oh, let's just turn it up a bit more. So far so good. So the MPPT should kick in at this voltage. And it's not activating the relay. That's good. That's exactly what I want. Let's push it a bit more. That's stable. The bias voltage on that transistor is still at 0.61, which is just below what it needs to be. A bit more. Let's go a bit higher. we're getting close to what the solar panel would put out at maximum sunlight at 18 volts. I usually see around 16. Let's go a bit more. I don't want to blow the voltage. I don't want to blow the 5x5 blow, because that's what I didn't want to put a regulator in there because it consumes current as well. That's good. So if you look, the transistor is no longer able to turn on because the voltage is over the threshold. That's good. Let's now, if I back it off now, if I drop the voltage, it should turn on. Oh, see if I can get these meters turned on a bit. Can't really. I'm just going to back off the voltage a bit. It should trigger at some point. Should trigger to about below 15 somewhere. Before well, it should trigger at some point. 4.62 is going up. Obviously, this isn't supposed to happen instantly. It's supposed to be over time, over long periods of time. Back it up a bit more. Oh, it's going, right. Where it's going to go then? We've got the scope. The disabled voltage is up a little bit still, so that has to settle. That's the bottom line. It's zeroed at the down at the bottom here. So it's actually, the disable is still active by the looks of it. Go down a bit more. Here we go. Wunderbar. So it works. So the voltage is below maximum peak power transfer for the MPPT, then this circuit should do the job and shunt power to the boost converter from the supercapacitors when needed. So if I've repeated this many times, it's just I'm going to be editing this video, so I don't know what I'm going to be leaving in and what I'm going to be cutting out. So relay went off. Oh no, it went on. Sorry. Anyway, I should cut off any minute. Yes, it's gone off now, actually. Timing. And the voltage just stopped climbing, so the white meter should start to climb now. Yay! That's what I want. Anyway, if there's anybody out there who wants to build me this circuit using a digital circuit, go ahead, because it will be so handy to have something like this. something that's all built in and easily programmed, because I tell you, I'm no good at digital stuff. I have to do it analog ways. But if you know a way to do this with a digital method that's compact and small and simple to adjust, then please be my guest. Because I mean, there's a lot of people out there with solar power. How many times have you got power and it's just not enough to charge your battery? But you don't. But if you try to boost that all the time, it's not a very efficient way of doing it, because you actually lose a lot of power in heat. So the relay is actually on right now. I have to wait for the timer to turn off. Just did. I didn't hear it quick though. It might be because the voltage was just so low. It really actually sometimes disengages before it actually gets to a certain voltage, because even though the LED's lit up, what can happen when the voltage gets so low, it can't hold, the holding current for the relay is no longer sufficient. So the relay will disengage even though the LED is still on. You might actually see the relay disengage. I'll get the magnifying glass. It just seems to help with the focus. There, the relay just clicked off then. The holding current wasn't sufficient to keep it on. My magnifying glass is mucky. So, the LED is still on, but the relay should still be on, but the voltage is just not enough to keep the relay active. So it actually starts flying again. Anyway, I'm just going to knock the voltage up a bit more, so that when it comes back up, we should exceed the voltage where the MPPT will normally be active. And we are. We're at 16 volts, which is above threshold for the MPPT. The relay is not on. Exactly what I want. Okay. Thanks for watching, folks. Right. Every time I try to film the relay before, where it released before the LED went out, I missed it. So I'm just doing this short clip. So you can see the relay disengage before the power to the relay does. I'm using my magnifying glass to get a good focus on it. Right. It's at 7.5 volts at the moment. The relay is currently engaged. There we go, it just clicked off then. And the LED is still on. Okay. And yeah, I'm very happy with the circuit now. It's running very well. What I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to put this whole breadboard over there on the netbook. I'm going to run some long wires, thin wires, so that I don't carry a lot of current, but we'll be running some thin wires between this block here to the actual supercapacitors to do a proper test. And because I'm going to be using thin wires, if there's any short, then the worst that could happen is the thin wires get quite kind of warm, and that should prevent a large amount of current flowing. But it'll be a good way of testing the circuit properly. And I've also made some other modifications. I changed this capacitor. And the resistor I couldn't remember earlier, the value of that resistor is 4 megaohms, right? It's actually 4 megaohms, that resistor. And this resistor down here is actually 10 megaohms, I believe, yeah. Let's get my magnifying glass on it. It helps with the focus. But I think, you know, it's 11 megaohms is that one. I remember now. It is 11 megaohms. So this one at the top is 4 megaohms, and that one's 11 megaohms. And by using high value resistors, I can use a much smaller capacitor. And I made an error earlier on. I just want to correct myself. This capacitor here, the blue one, is 10 volts at 100 microfarads. I actually said 10 volts, 10 microfarads earlier. It's my age. I'm just getting too old. You know, I'm just getting too old to remember all this stuff. But it's 100 ohms, 100 microfarads, sorry, at 10 volts. And yeah, okay. I just wanted to correct myself. I've replaced this capacitor here with it was a 470 before, and I found I didn't need a 470. It's actually 100 microfarad, and it's actually, even though the circuit's active, just a minute. Even though the circuit's active, I can pull that out. Show you. Because it doesn't affect the circuit very much. So with a magnifying glass it works really well. 100 microfarads, 10 volts. I'll have to use my magnifying glass in future when I want to show components. It's just a bit fiddly. Just put this back in again. I'll make sure I get it right way around. Sorry, my finger's in the way. Sorry about that. So anyway, yeah, it doesn't make a great deal of difference to the circuit, actually. I could even omit that one. Doesn't seem to really need it. Obviously, the less you can get away with, the better, really, when you're building these circuits. But, yeah. I might not even bother with these trimmers, actually. The trimmers don't seem to do a lot. Most of the tuning is done by the Zener diodes, and I did actually change those as well. Instead of using the Zener diode, let me just get this wire out of the way. Instead of actually using 9.1 Zener diode in series with a well, actually, I had the 9.1 Zener diode because I removed the one that was in series previously. But since then, I put 6.2, which 6.2 Zener diode, which is that one, and it's in series with I think it's 2.4 or something. Anyway, basically, the voltage is around about, let's see. It's around about, I think it's about 11 volts or something across the two Zeners. So because of the droppage in the resistors and everything else, it actually does now trigger at around about 11 volts or so on the voltage. I can get it to trip at about 11 volts, which is okay. And as I say, I'm quite happy with the way it's working at the moment. And the only way the only stage I can think of now is to test it in the real world on the supercapacitors, because it's working quite well, and I can't do much more now until I have it hooked up to something in the real world that it's actually going to be doing. It's actually set to trigger at about 13.66 at the moment, and it works. So, thank you very much for watching. As I say, I'm sorry about if my videos seem a little bit long-winded. I did edit some of it out, but I'm getting a bit old, and I think as you get old, you do tend to repeat yourself. But it's better to be clear and decisive and in explanation than to omit information and then prompt a lot of questions from people. But obviously, when I get this circuit built, I have to draw the circuit diagram out anyway. Once I've got it fully tested, and I draw the circuit diagram out before I build the PCB. At some point, I will put the video showing the circuit diagram for it on YouTube, if it turns out to be viable and useful, or if other people want to see it. But please don't ask for a circuit diagram yet, because I haven't actually proved concepts yet with this in the real world to make sure it does actually work. And obviously, if it doesn't work for me, then there's not much point in sharing it for anyone else. Thank you for watching. Right, I decided rather than bring Muhammad to the mountain, I would bring the mountain to Muhammad. So I've got my supercapacitors here. 500 farad green cap. I actually see them from the back. If I can get this out of the way. There's 6 of them there. The maximum voltage I put in them, I made a circuit that balances the supercapacitors out, and I just disconnected the ends of my existing boost converter, because I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to use this one instead. So I don't mind leaving the extra load on there. It won't really take much of a load anyway, since there's nothing being drawn from the output. But I thought, well, let's see if my circuit can actually work on the supercapacitors. But I must admit, it is extremely slow going at the moment, as you would expect. I'm actually putting 50 milliamps in at the moment. I'm going to have to step that up, I think. But 50 milliamps is being pushed in. I'm just simulating. If you remember from the video earlier, I was looking at a reading of about 90 milliamps. So I thought, well, let's try it at 50 to see if the circuit is going to work the way I want it to work. So I'm not going to video all of this because it's going to take ages, but the voltage is slowly climbing. Now, when this supercapacitor does actually get charged, these LED modules should come on, and that's going to draw some current, so I'm going to have to boost the input current a little bit, at least 150 milliamps. But what I'm going to do is, when the relay kicks in, it's going to supply the boost converter, and the boost converter is set to about 16 volts, and that's going to send power back into the circuit to power the circuit on the board, which basically will self-power itself, and that will take away the current limitation down there. So I've got to be very careful, obviously, whenever it triggers, and just watch the voltages and to make sure that everything's working the way it is. And as soon as the supercapacitor discharges again, the relay should go off and it should start to charge again. Now, if I set the voltage above the 15 volts, I'm hoping that the supercapacitors will not actually be engaged on the relay. Now, that is going to be the big question, and I'm going to have to wait a long time. So I'm going to make some rather very short videos, because my other video, I could not believe it. After I edited it all together, it came to 1 hour and 57 minutes. Oh my God! Did I waffle for 2 hours? Holy moly! Oh God! Well, I must stop now. I'll just give you an update when I have something else. So, it's slow progress. So, I turned up the current on the on the power supply to 240 milliamps, and now I'm getting some digital readouts on the supercapacitor bank and the voltmeter. That's the voltage regulator that's on the top there, and that actually regulates the amount of voltage that is allowed to go into the supercapacitors, so it doesn't exceed the maximum. And I've also got balance circuits which I've built, which you can't really see, but there's some transistors underneath, sort of sandwiched in between that plastic and a metal heatsink. And there's a bunch of them going all the way down. There's one for each supercapacitor, and they actually help to prevent the capacitors becoming unequal, so they're all equal voltage. Say one capacitor charges before the others. As soon as it reaches that maximum 2.7 volts, the transistor acts as a current bypass. Right, here we go, there we go, 230 milliamps. That's good. So look, we're putting 200 and what's this? 210, 20. Actually, well, that was pretty close. According to this, it's 220 milliamps coming in, and we know that this circuit here, this actual circuit here, without the relay active, uses virtually nothing. It's less than like probably 20 milliamps. So we're getting some pretty accurate readings on here, and most of the current on my circuit board is being shunted through the I don't want to short anything out. Most of the current on the board is being shunted through these diodes, these two diodes. There's only a small amount of current that's going through the resistor network and the capacitor, but the key, what I'm looking for, will be that my circuit does not prematurely activate. As long as we have a positive voltage on here, as long as I can see that there's a reading on here of, you know, a few milliamps. Well, I've got 220 milliamps, and it's even telling us the voltage that we're getting on the supercapacitors. So it's climbing nicely. So I'll stop the video and update when we're getting close to our threshold voltage. It's about 10 volts on the setting on here, so that I can simulate that the voltage will stop at around 10 volts, and the current on here should drop down to virtually zero once it reaches it, and the idea being that it's not going to trigger. So hopefully this will not climb for the transistor on the base voltage of the transistor for the trigger circuit we've been working on, it should not activate until it gets to around 12, 13 volts. So I'm just waiting for that to reach the threshold of about 10 volts, and then I'm going to increase the voltage to about 14 volts to see if the circuit does trip when it's supposed to do. So anyway, so far so good. It's not false triggered or anything. Voltage is still climbing. Taking quite a while. Oh, but that's a little bit disconcerting. It's the base voltage is rising to 0.61. I hope it doesn't get too high because it will probably trip prematurely. We're still getting 140 milliamps of charge to the supercapacitors, so that's good. But looking at the scope, we do appear to have a bit of bias on the transistor, but if you remember, it needs to be 3 of those squares for it to trip, so I think we're quite safe at the moment, because we've only got one division, one in the bit division, and the disabled one is obviously still at 0. So far so good. So I'll just stop and come back when we've got another update. Right. Current is dropped to 0. The current on the bias of the transistor is 0.63. Voltage is stopped at about 9.74. The oscilloscope, as you can see, we're not even close to tripping yet the trigger circuit. So now I have to increase the voltage, primary voltage, so that we can start to get some positive gain again. So I'm going to turn this, and we're going to get 230 milliamps. We're now on a positive gain. We're now at 10 volts, and we're now going to start to see some changes. I'm hoping that my circuit doesn't prematurely trip at 250 milliamps because we're on a positive slope, and so far we are looking good. Now, as we reach 12, 13 volts, if the charge current falls back at some point, then the relay will trip, sending the power from the supercapacitors back into the circuit, which is boost regulated to about 15 volts. So we'll actually have 15 volts going back into the circuit, and that will keep the circuit active, and also the relay will remain active until the supercapacitor has been completely exhausted and discharged, at which point the relay will disengage and it will switch the power off, self-supplying itself, and the circuit will then become dependent again on the supply voltage, which will then begin to trickle through the circuit again, recharging the supercapacitor. So that's the way I've got this configured at the moment. Let's check we're still good until we have, actually I did change this actually. I set it to 0.5 instead of 0.1, so we are actually closer than I thought. So if that gets to about 1.5 divisions, which is just below that, it will trip the relay, and the voltage on the base of that transistor is 0.67, so it's obviously not enough to trip yet, and we'll still get a positive gain. And if it does trip prematurely, then I will have to increase the value of that capacitor, this one here, which is 100 microfarad. I'll have to put a 220 or possibly even a 470 in there, even though I have got 11 mega ohm resistor, because obviously the charging speed of the supercapacitors is much slower, and the voltage is increasing much slower than it does. Oh, it's tripped. It is actually tripped. And this is the voltage we're getting now from the supercapacitor, which is supplying itself. It has just tripped. The relay has activated. The power now is being discharged from the supercapacitor and it's powering itself. Okay, so that capacitor, the 100 microfarad, will need to be increased to a larger one. And I can certainly tell that we're running off the supercapacitors because, you can certainly tell that we're running on the supercapacitor because there's a lot of noise actually on the oscilloscope. The power supply has got that high frequency noise on there, probably something like 600 kilohertz or something, which is being generated by this boost converter, which is feeding back into the circuit, and that's what's causing that noise. So there is an anomaly there, but it's certainly nothing that's going to interfere with the circuit. Oh, the relay has just turned off. That's cool. 7.71 volts. The voltage flipped, the timer timed out basically, and we are now charging again. And the oscilloscope, the noise on the oscilloscope has disappeared because we're now running back on we're now charging at 300 milliamps. We're at about 11 volts. Well, actually closer to 10. And the biasing on the transistor is at 0.14. And I put a big 470 microfarad capacitor back in there again because I figured, well, because the charging rate is so slow on the supercapacitor, we needed to put a big chunky one in again, and then I can work my way backwards again, using smaller ones if need be. But 260 milliamps is currently being dumped back into the supercapacitor. But the circuit does work. It's just not working ideally the way I want it to. But hopefully that bigger capacitor should sort that out. So I'm just going to pause for a bit. And so we're getting close to that threshold point again. And I want to video it as it happens. I think what actually happened was, because the timer's flat out now, I've set it to maximum, and the pot is actually at full. Now the timer actually timed out before it had discharged all of the power. So what I'll have to do is replace this capacitor that's on this board, because if you look, it's got these circles. It means that you can put larger capacitors in to increase the timing period. So I'm not sure exactly what capacitors that one is, but I'll have to have a look and probably double it or triple it or something, so I can actually gain a longer duration, so we can keep the supercapacitors active longer. it's probably 100 microfarad or something. So I'll just replace that, put a 470 in or something, which should do the job. And the voltage on the base of the transistor is much better now. It's at 0.08. And our voltage at the moment coming in is at 10.71. The current to the supercapacitor charging is at 260 milliamps. So we're still well within our range limits now. Unless I've made a bit of a boo-boo and pulled a wire out somewhere, which I don't know if I have or not. Well, according to the oscilloscope, it's on the verge of tripping again. Hang on. Oh, that's odd. Huh. Now that's a bit of an anomaly. What's going on here? Oh, of course, it will trip. It will trip as soon as the forward biasing on the large capacitor stops. So that's what's going on. So that's fine. As long as we've got a positive bias on that capacitor there, this voltage here will stay at 0.09 or thereabouts. Once this current in red starts to drop, this will start to rise. And once it gets to 0.69 or 0.65 around about, that's when it'll trip. And the current voltage is 11.18. So all good so far. I do want to back up on the current though, because I want to see what happens when it's only about, let's see, I want to get it down to about 60 milliamps. There, oops, too much. Now let's just see what happens on here. That should start to climb. And if it climbs really slowly, that'll be perfect for me. Our primary voltage has actually dropped though. I think I've turned it back too far. So let's just turn it back, bump it back up again a little bit. Oops. Around about. It'll soon catch up by itself from there. 130 milliamps. 120 milliamps. Right, I've just put it very close to. I want to stop, and that's set to. That's currently at 11.22 volts. The bias on the base of the transistor is up the same. Obviously, that larger capacitor is definitely working. Okay, I'll just pause until I've got something else. Right, okay, we're seeing fluctuations. I'm just seeing fluctuations on the base transistor. It's fluctuating between 0.7 and 0.8. And the current charge at the moment is 80 milliamps. So that's certainly better. It's certainly operating much more reliably because it's not false triggering. It's only at 11.30 volts. It's not tripping yet. Time to pause again. Right, I've just been sat here waiting for ages and ages for this capacitor to charge up through that. It's going to trip. I left it sat at 11.41 volts for absolutely ages, and I was starting to wonder if the capacitor was had a large leakage, and I was looking for another one because I thought maybe the capacitor was actually leaking, as in had a partial short circuit. But I was wrong, because it is working. It is starting to reach the voltage of when it's going to trip. Even though it's actually below what I want, the supercapacitor is currently reading 9.82 volts, but that's still good. Because I did set it quite low, because I wanted to see if it would work. And yes, the base of that transistor is about to trip and switch on the relay. So that's good. I can get all three in. So you can see the meters in the background. .66 at the moment. There we go. It's activated. Yeah, I'm happy with that, because the circuit is working. The only thing I need to change now is that capacitor in the timer circuit, because the relay doesn't stay on long enough. But it is utilising that energy in the supercapacitor now to supply the circuit the way I wanted, and we can see that the voltage is actually dropping. Because I think, I'm not sure, but I think the boost converter must be set fairly low actually, because the voltage wouldn't be so low on there. Definitely that's working. Good. Well, I'm going to stop now, and then I'm going to put a bigger capacitor in that timer. Right, the capacitor that was in there before was 100 microfarad on the timer for this 555 timer circuit. So I took out the 100 microfarad 25 volt, and I put a 50 volt 220 microfarad in. Should be a lot better. That should give me a lot longer duration on the timer, so it stays active longer. Now I've re-energized the circuit, charging the supercapacitors at 300 milliamps, which is pretty standard. I've been watching the solar panels charging my supercapacitors, and yeah, in fairly dull days when there's not much sun, you can expect something like 300 milliamps quite easily. But as it gets close to around 10 volts, it usually drops down to trickle like 100, 150 to even just 60 milliamps. And it's on those occasions that I want to be able to restore the residual power in the supercapacitor, and then when you get it up to a certain amount. Now, you might say, well, what's the point of doing this? Well, I'll just explain this again, because you see, normally if you use a boost converter like this one, and you boost 5 volts, because these things tend to pull the voltage way down to about 4 volts from the solar panel, and you hardly ever see it climb anywhere above 4 volts unless you've got quite a lot of solar panels. So the heatsink, I had to put this heatsink on because it dissipates. It gets so hot, it actually, you're losing nearly all the power in heat. And even this coil transformer gets hot. So because it's stepping up from 4 volts up to 15 volts, you're losing a great deal of power in heat. So it is much more efficient to send that power into a supercapacitor and get it up to around 12, 13, 14 volts, and then activate the circuit to the boost converter, because while it's actually converting a voltage between, let's say, 14 volts to around 9 volts, it is actually more efficient in charging a battery. But as the voltage drops on the supercapacitor, the efficiency of the conversion ratio drops off. So I do see there's a huge benefit from using the supercapacitor method, because I'm storing that energy and I'm losing less power in wasted heat. And I'm also sending that power at about 1.5 amps into my batteries. And so it's kind of like pulse charging in a way. Pulse charging in intermittent periods. But I think it's much more efficient than consistently converting a low power from the solar panel and stepping it up, because you're just losing nearly 70% as heat. 70% deficiency, I would say. So I would say that this way is sort of 50-50, probably better than that. Efficiency, maybe more like 60% more efficient than using just the boost converter on its own directly to the solar panels on a cloudy day. Because when that voltage on the input of these boost converters is low, at 4 volts or 5 volts, you're just losing everything in heat. That's the problem. That's why a lot of these MPPTs that you buy do not come with a boost converter. They only come with a step down, because it's inefficient. It's a very inefficient way of doing it. So we're climbing 8.5 volts. Base transistor is still at 0.6. We're still charging. I'll come back to this in a bit.